Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for December 13th, 2024. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating. And also present are Ralph Kohler, Aaron McHale, and Simo Helston. So today we're going to start with an issue from the project browser module. The issue number is 3481652. Sort by filter is conflicting after switching between different tabs. Oh, I just noticed something in the new font that Drupal.org is using. I guess it's been a few months. I don't know if that still counts as new, but that is a very odd ligature for the FF. Um, but of course, that must have been intentional. Someone likes it. Um, and Ralph, you're saying in the chat, I've just activated the core module source type as well. Is that something I should do in my version?
Just the reload.
Okay.
In your version, yep, in configuration, development, project browser. And then just drag the core modules from disabled to enabled
Oops.
and save.
Okay.
Because each source type has different search options, and that is the gist of that issue. And the general point is made in comment number 3 by Tim Plunkett.
Okay. So by default, the contrib modules tab has most popular as the default option. And when we have visit the core modules tab, then we have only two sort by options, alphabetical and reverse alphabetical. When a user jumps from contrib modules tab to core modules and then back to contrib modules, then the sort by option for contrib modules also changes to alphabetical. And comment 3, my expectation is that if you never interact with the sort option, every tab should be sorted by their default sort. But if you select a specific sort for one tab, it should persist across tabs when possible. All right. So that's one person's expectation. So here's the unpatched version of the module. Um, And you can tell the difference between the two by the fav icon. I've installed Umami, so you see the orange U, and Ralph has installed the standard profile with the blue Drupal icon, and that's where the patch is applied. So to interact with this, I start off on the Contrib Modules tab. I'm sorting by relevancy. Token is first, CTools is second. I switch to the Core Modules tab. It's sorted alphabetically. Announcements, automated cron. I switch back to Contrib Modules, and it seems that it's still sorted by relevancy. I maybe I didn't understand something, but I think I'm not reproducing the problem. Is that something that changed between the alpha version that I'm using and the dev version?
Might be.
When a user
And also
jumps,
the issue when it was created was, I guess, be pre-Alpha 6. The latest Alpha was shipped recently.
okay.
I'm not completely wrong. A second, I just quickly look.
This is similar to what's being reported in some other issue.
Yeah, Alpha 6 was released on the 27th of November, and that issue was filed in October.
So it refers to this other issue, which for the sake of the recording is 3472334. Um, this issue was fixed in November, I guess. Um, or the end of October. Um, this was created in mid-October.
There's one detail that has to be noted. Back in the beginning, some of those filter settings were leaking and the results were leaking between the different source types. So it was way worse than it is at the moment. And the search results, all those issues circle around, yeah, the silo or the scope of the different source types. And yeah, I'm not, from technical underlying, I'm not sure what's the reason are, but yeah, those were problematic. And the question is basically, yeah, and one thing you should take if you could go to the browse page in your example, for example, it has also to be noted that the number of options differ between um, the
The
different
number of
source
sort
types.
options.
Yeah. For example, here you have most relevant, newest first, and if you go to core, then you have, for example, A to Z and Z to A. And recipes, I guess, has the same as contrib modules, or none at all at the moment. Oh. They had previously.
Okay, but looking at some of the comments on the issue, here's the one that's been fixed. I'm going to close that. But looking at the comments on the issue, um, comment 5 says that this issue is obsolete. Comment 6 says, no, it's still a valid issue based on comment 3, which is the one we read earlier. So I think what is going on is that this is the new issue description, but no one has bothered to update the summary. Um, so uh, I think I have some standard language that I can use to say when you add the needs usability review tag, please make sure that the issue summary is up to date and a few other things. Um, so I guess I guess the idea is that according to the comment that Tim Plunkett made, number 3, if you actually go ahead and change the order, then that should persist across tabs. And that's what doesn't happen. And of course, it can't persist across tabs because they have different options. So there's no way that it could persist across tabs currently. So that's how it works with the latest alpha release and without the patch. Um, with the current merge request, and I have to reload this to see the core tab.
Yes.
There we go. I'm surprised at how slow it is to reload this page. Oh, go ahead. You can collect cookies, Ralph. Um,
No, no. It was okay. Anyway, I have to reinstall it later to
so
get
the
it back.
sort options for contrib modules are still relevance and recency. Sort options for core modules are still A to Z and Z to A. If I change that and switch tabs, I don't see any difference. So I don't see any change in the behavior.
Uh,
Um, so
um, if you take a look at the issue fork and the merge request, there is no actual code. There's no
okay.
diff. So
So the statuses needs review, but there's no code yet. They're asking for a usability review on the proposal. So we should, when we comment on this, we should set it back to active, ask for an issue summary update. But I think at this point, all we have to go on are the comments.
How does one reset the sorting back to default?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Does the user know which is the default sorting?
Does the user know which one is the default sort?
So it would be like not really useful to have any kind of reset button there, but something like the user like kind of knowing what is the recommended one.
yeah,
You think
recommended filters is the reset.
Yeah, does it reset the sort?
Yeah.
That's actually, I think it shouldn't. Or should it?
Just click the recommended filters, Benji, maybe.
The recommended filters, here we go. So why did you want me to do that?
To demonstrate basically the reset and just set it to
Oh,
newest
okay.
first.
So I change the sort order and then say I clear filters
No.
and it still says newest first. I click recommended filters and it still says newest first.
Could you change to another source type and then switch back to contrib modules? And yeah, it is so the default is restored when you switch, basically. There's
Right.
something I've noticed with the core module source type. Haven't tested on contrib modules.
Right. Switching tabs is a full page load. At least it seems to be. Although the URL doesn't change. So there's something behind the scenes, something invisible to the user that controls that. So if I choose something here, switch tabs, and switch back, I go back to the default sort.
It's outside of this issue, but I think that if it shouldn't be in the same box with the filters that can be cleared if it doesn't affect, and I think maybe it shouldn't, but maybe that should be sort by should be located
Yep.
close to list and grid options.
Yeah, there is an issue for that already.
Okay, cool.
1 second, I just searched the number.
Oh, these two options.
Yeah.
You think that should be grouped together with sort by? So let's read the most recent comment. What should we do in this situation? One, go to source D, sort reverse alphabetically, jump back to source A, which has no Z to A. 3, so it sets source A to sort by its default. And then currently it's also setting all sources to sort by their defaults too. So step 4, you jump back to D, and it's no longer Z to A. Should we instead keep D's sort Z to A, effectively meaning we're storing the active sort per source? But if that's the case, what would happen if I, 1, go to source D, sort reverse alphabetical, go to source A, which has no Z to A, so it sorts by relevancy. 3, change source A to date. 3 again means 4, go back to D. Should it still be Z to A, or should it be date if available, or should it be its default? So I guess the first question to ask, in my opinion, which no one on the issue has asked yet, is should we have different options depending on the source? It's a sort of odd decision, so I assume there's a reason behind it. So maybe that was decided on some previous issue. Ralph, do you know anything about that decision?
Uh, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess technical reasons, because you can't have a consistent set of sort by options across all possible source types. That's the problem, because for core modules, most relevant doesn't make much sense. And the other option was newest first. It's also debatable.
That's true. Neither of these makes sense for core. I think most relevant is from some sort of Solr server. And once you enter something in the search, the Solr search will return something. And I guess it's sorted by popularity or number of installs.
There,
Go ahead.
there is one issue, but I'm not sure if I am able to find it right away, where Neil Drum explained the weighing of the different criteria for that relevancy.
Okay, that's more detail than I want to see right now. Just knowing that it's from Solr is enough for now. Yeah, so neither of these options would make sense for core modules. So I guess it does make sense that we have different sort options for the different sources. Sort of odd that there's no choice. I guess there's one choice, and if you have one choice, there's no point in giving you a drop-down list. It must be alphabetical. No, it's not alphabetical. Um, and for core modules, sorting by date doesn't make sense. Sorting by relevancy could make sense, but we'd have to add the data somehow. And so we only have the alphabetical sorts.
I also just checked. I don't know if it was mentioned already that the filtering persists when switching tabs. So if you filter contrib modules, go to core modules, and then go back to contrib modules, then the filters are still the same. So if you filter by, let's say, accessibility and then go to core modules, and then go back to contrib modules, so the list is still filtered. So in that sense, it should be the same list it was before, also in other aspects. So that would be in favor of storing the value of sort by, so that it would.
Okay. So you're saying filters are persistent, they're attached to the tab or the source. Um, So the sort by option should have the same behavior, right?
Yes,
That's what
so
you're saying?
then they would have the same kind of behavior than switching between browser tabs.
Right.
So that what's visible there is the same, depending no matter in which order you click them open and
Yeah,
away.
I think that's a good point. Ralph?
One other detail to note that was a bit more serious in previous iterations is, as Simo noted, if you, for example, select one category, and that's also one thing that is quite confusing about that interface is the idea was basically you have search, then you filter, narrow it down, and then you do the sort and how the results are presented. But at the moment, on top, you also have basically those source types. And at the bottom, you see next in the row of list and grid, you have 61 results. And above the search field, you have that source type with also 61 results, but you also have 28 results and 70 results, a results count for the other. So the message is the search is across all available source types. And that's super confusing. And before that, in previous iterations, if you've entered something that results not only adjusted for contrib modules, but also for recipes and core modules. And that was the point that some of those and the root cause of all those issues that some of those settings leaked over into the other source types, and it's super confusing.
Right. So let's see. If I clear filters, then I still have 28. I now have
And
72. It was
yeah,
70, wasn't it?
exactly.
Wow. Um,
I think core modules should be included in the same, so that would be modules, and it would be something like checkbox include core modules, so that let's say if somebody looks for admin navigation things like toolbars, they would see admin toolbar, core toolbar, and navigation all at the same time and could compare. So it kind of, I'm a little bit confused by having two different tabs for modules or recipes or themes. It makes sense, but yeah, that's also not about this issue.
right.
Um,
Ralph, go ahead.
may I quickly add to the point? Yeah, that was also brought up because the suggestion was the renaming is sort of confusing. Adding contrib modules and core modules, the concept of core and contrib for someone not familiar with Drupal, that is challenging. But also the point Simo made was also brought up by Brandon in the Drupal Dojo Austin when I've did some impromptu interview with them. He said basically that distinction between contrib and core should simply be a filter. So you have a source type modules with a filter select box where you can either select both or core or contrib, and that way you're able to distinguish. Because for him, he wanted, if I search for modules, I want to see basically it would be useful to see if you search, for example, for like something accessibility related. I have already installed module A and B in core, or there are modules in core or installed in the site that are already known, or there are additional modules in contrib. So if you search for both, filter for both, then you see core first and then contrib or something like that. But making that basically a filter option would be way more straightforward and useful like it is at the moment, because the core modules, the dedicated source type for core modules is probably only rooted for, in air quotes, replacing the modules list page. But in the context of for browsing for new modules, it is completely useless.
Right. So we're getting way out of scope for this issue, but I agree that having these two separate tabs is a bad user experience. Aaron, go ahead. You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah. So I realize this is off topic, but I've been thinking the same thing. Like I was gonna basically say the same thing as Ralph. But I think that yeah, it just again from a thinking from a Drupalism's perspective as well, the idea of like contrib feels very Drupalism-y, to invent another word, I suppose. And yeah, I think I totally agree with what's being said. I think it's very like for someone new coming in, that could be a really moment of like what does contrib mean kind of thing. They already have to understand what module means, and now they have to understand core and contrib. And also the thing with like Drupal CMS is we're really now blurring the lines between what is core and what is contrib, right? We're not like people coming into Drupal CMS are not thinking about, oh, this module is core because it was installed out of the box. Now we have to think, okay, this module, it's a module, it's supported, it's part of Drupal CMS. It just happens to be included in the Drupal, in Drupal core. So I think the distinction becomes a lot blurrier going forward. So yeah, I would totally support not having these as two tabs.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and Ralph gave you a thumbs up as well. And he in the chat, Ralph gives a heavy +1 about the blurry bit, blurring the distinction between core and contrib. Okay, so I think we have consensus that the separation of contrib modules from core modules into two separate tabs is a bad thing. Simo, you're the only one who hasn't spoken up on that particular question. And you're still muted.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that it's confusing to me.
Okay. So we have consensus on that. Now there are technical issues, like how do you combine them when they're from different sources? But the usability recommendation is that they should be combined. If we do that, then some of the questions go away, right? Like, we won't be switching back between core and contrib modules. So we wouldn't be changing the sort order. And Simo puts a joke in the chat. We could start calling core modules hardcore modules and Drupal CMS default modules core. And Ralph gives us this link. Discuss and perhaps improve how source types are integrated into the overall search experience. So this has a long issue description. It's listed as a
Go ahead, sorry.
It's listed as a beta blocker. And you say this is basically what we've been discussing?
Yeah. That's the point about the core and contrib.
Okay. And for the sake of the recording, the issue number is 3487832. So.
And there's also one other detail from a performance perspective. As you've noticed, Benji, on your search, the search results, while you're searching on contrib modules, the search results for core went from 70 results up to 72 results. So basically, at the moment, it's okay-ish because recipes and core modules are local. But as soon as something like recipes also gets an endpoint on Drupal.org, you then make basically a request for all available source types. So make a request for contrib modules, for recipes, and any other remote source you have a source type for. So from a performance perspective, is also a question because those are many requests.
I mean, from performance and also from usability, when I filter on a category and this number changes, and this time these two numbers didn't change. And there is no accessibility category for or filter for core modules.
Yep.
So now I can't reproduce the change I had before where I saw 70.
Yeah, but that is still the residue of that leaking I've mentioned before.
Okay.
That was way more serious. It got better, but it's still there. But from my perspective, the leaking over doesn't make sense at all. Those results in the tab should be simply removed, and the scope of a search should be in the tab. Otherwise, the search would have to move up between the primary tabs and the secondary tabs. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Right. We should either remove these result counts or possibly they should be constant. You can always list how many recipes are available, how many core modules, how many contrib modules. But when you start filtering, the result count should be down here, and it's already there. It should not affect what's going on the tabs. So probably just remove the three, remove the result counts from the tabs. Is the simplest solution, and less is more. And I don't really see the value of saying how many available modules there are. But getting back to the original question, even if we do combine core and contrib modules, there will still be a tab for recipes. Are we eventually going to have a tab for themes as well? And one of the people testing it mentioned he had some test source. So we are going to continue to have tabs. And the different tabs will have different sort options. And we already talked about that. That does make sense, although it's surprising at first. But should the tabs be independent? And I think the answer is yes. Do we have consensus on that? Thumbs up from Ralph and from Aaron and from Simo. Okay.
Just one brief addition, but aside being independent, from my perspective, it should also be the case that the taken sort order for a certain source type should be remembered. At the moment, it is not the case. So if you pick, for example, for core modules from Z to A, and then move to contrib modules and move back, it's back to the actual default for the source type A to Z. And it's not that bad, in air quotes, with that few options available, but still, if I make a decision, I want to be that it is kept.
Right. So I sort reverse alphabetical workspaces comes first. I switch back, and I'm back to alphabetical with announcements coming first.
To add to that, also grid or list should. I didn't check if they stay, but they should also be persistent so that everything should be the same.
Okay, lister grid seems to be persistent across tabs. And so lister grid is persistent across tabs. Sort by is not persistent at all. It resets to the default every time you switch tabs. So let's see. Does everyone agree that the sort order should be persistent? That if I change it to reverse alphabetical, switch and switch back, it should still be reverse alphabetical. Does everyone agree to that? Thumbs up from Ralph. A hand from Aaron, which I think is the same as the thumbs up. Feel
I was
free
just
to.
gonna say that, like, I think whatever it is, I don't have a strong feeling whether it stays, whether it it retain. I guess the word is retains, because, like, obviously we're not advocating for it being, I guess, the same across tabs. I don't think. I think we're just saying we want it to retain the results if you go back to the tab. But what I don't, as I said, I don't have a strong feeling about that. Or what I do feel is that it should, whatever we do should be consistent behavior. Like if it, like we're seeing inconsistent behavior insofar as, like, sometimes the results, sometimes if you apply a sort or a filter, it's applying across all tabs, and sometimes it's not. So, like, that's where my feeling, I think, is.
Yeah, so the filter is you didn't like the word persist, but it's what term did you use?
I just use the word retain, like it
Retain.
retains the. I guess persist is fine, just like just because, if we want to create a distinction between the filters applying only in the context of the current tab and being persistent in the context of the current tab. That's why the word retain might be better, because it retains what you've selected.
Okay.
Rather than, like, persists could imply, like, persists across all tabs, I guess. I suppose it actually, to be fair, I guess you could make the argument for either word. So I'm just gonna you know what I mean. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now.
Okay. So yes, so if I filter by category on core and I go to a different source and come back, then that filter is retained. That filter is still there.
Right.
And I see that Offer Shaw has joined us. Hi, Offer. We're talking about the project browser. So okay, so I think yeah, I think we've all said that it should be consistent so that the behavior of the category or the filter should have the same behavior as the sort order. So we already have that persistence. If I switch away and come back to this tab, then whatever filter I've selected is retained. We should have that same behavior for the sort order. And I want to go on to lister grid, but I'll give Ralph a chance to speak up first.
Yeah, I wanted exactly go into that list or grid problem because I've linked the other issue above already about the point Simo made, moving the sort by down to the list and grid. And that brings up one potential problem about expectations, because at the moment, because our suggestion is basically for each source type, the filter and the sort by should be retained or persistent for that particular source type. But if we move now down the sort by to the list and grid, that list and grid is the same setting across all source types. So the effect might be potentially confusing.
Right. So just for the recording, the issue number is 3487970, and that's the suggestion to group the sort by with the list or grid options. And is it suggesting to move sort by down or move list and grid up?
Sort by down.
Okay.
So that the filters, that only actual filters are in that filters field set, and sort by in this grid is basically about how those filtered and searched results are presented to the user.
Okay, so whether or not we do that, whether or not we move sort by next to the list and grid, should the choice of list or grid affect all three tabs? So if I switch to list, when I'm looking at core modules, I still have list view in the other tabs. If I switch to grid view, and then I switch tabs, I still have grid view. So that's, and I think that just from the mental mapping point of view, that if something is going to affect all three tabs, then it should not be inside the tab. If we want to keep the current behavior, we'd have to somehow move that choice up to the same level as the tabs. But I think it's probably a better idea to change the behavior and keep the layout. Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because what we've been talking about up until now is about what data is displayed, and things like the filters are very contextual to the tab you're on, right? So that's why I think we were all okay with it being tab specific. I think what we're talking about here with the layout is more about a sort of like presentational, like how you display it, and that's something where typically I see this being like a user preference. Once you've decided that you like it in list format or grid format, you probably are going to want it to be like that all the time. And I guess maybe there could be other like user preferences. So I'm just wondering if there's a way, like a sort of thought is like, is there a way to present this as a sort of like, yeah, user preferences? And so maybe that helps us, like maybe there's a settings gear and maybe it's not down. Maybe like, as you said, Benji, we move it to be higher up. So it's, in the information architecture, it makes more, in how the page is structured, it makes more sense. And maybe that's a sort of like, yeah, like a settings gear, and you go in and you can set preferences, and one of those is the display of it, whether it's list or grid. And that might be a way to reconcile that issue.
What I'm thinking, maybe I'm like a little bit held back by the history, but I think and the future at the same time. So I'm thinking that displaying themes here, I would probably want to look at themes in a different kind of display than modules. So one would be list, one would be grid. So there could be that kind of things, but that I'm talking about something that doesn't exist yet. So it's okay to not to have it like that. But I think I personally, I think I would prefer to be able to set it different for different source types.
Okay, and you get a thumbs up from Ralph. And Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Simo. And for me personally, already, I would have the case modules. I would probably, contract modules, remote ones, I would probably display in grid, while recipes, I see no purpose at all to display them in a grid, because due to the lack of content, I would definitely already go with a list view there. And there's also another issue already that moves at the moment. That list view looks more like a stretched card, and it should be basically moved to the pattern on the media page where you have an actual table as the list view and a card style view for the previews, and that should be also applied there styling wise. But yeah, so it would already apply for me. For recipes, I would go with list, and for modules, I would go with grid.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this
Yeah,
before.
exactly.
In the media library, there's a big difference between grid and table views. And really, the only difference here is whether it's one across, which we call list, or if it's two across, which we call grid. And I don't know, is it possible to get three across if you make page really? Yes. So anyway, it's a card view regardless of which of these two you choose.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, actually, I think Simo made a really good point, and following on with what Ralph said as well, like actually when you if we do get themes, I think that makes a lot more sense. Themes make a lot more sense in a grid view because the theme, when you're picking a theme, you're really concerned about the visual presentation. Whereas with modules and recipes, I actually think perhaps the default should be the list because the like in a grid view, the images there are become the most prominent, but actually the images are the least important thing. And it's more about the information, like the name of the module or recipe, the description that tells you what it does. Like those are like the most important piece of information, and that's what the list view it does better at, whether it's a card or as you said, a table style. So actually, I'm gonna redact my earlier comment, although I realize this being a recording, it's already on the record. So, but yeah, I think actually if we keep it per tab, but I would suggest then the default actually should be the list view. But then when we come to adding themes, then maybe grid makes more sense as the default for themes because I think, as I said, that's what does the best job at then communicating the information that you care about at that point.
Okay, so we have to wrap this up. We have about 3 minutes left. So I think I'm going to say postpone the discussion on whether to change the default from grid to list. But I think that I think we now have consensus that we should keep this choice where it is. Um, Another advantage of that we haven't mentioned before is that it's keeping the control close to the thing it controls. Um, but the more important thing is that as we have different sources, that recipes now and modules, and eventually themes, those are really good use cases for having different choices. So it should be um, like the filters and like we would like to have the sort order. It should be specific to a tab and it should be remembered as you switch tabs. So I think we have consensus on all of that, and we can talk some other time about whether to make list or grid the default for different views. Um, so there are a few issues here that we could comment on. I'm happy to leave a comment on the issue we started on, um, the one explicitly about the sort order. Um, and I could comment on some of the others unless one of you wants to volunteer. Okay, let's wrap it up. Next week will be the 20th. I expect we'll meet then. The following week is the day after Christmas. And I'm willing to meet, but I think in the past we've almost no one else has joined me. So we should probably just cancel that. So have next week's meeting and then not until January. But again, I don't mind meeting the day after Christmas. So if anyone expresses interest in joining the meeting, I'll have it. So thanks again for coming, and hope to see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.